on adult responsibilities with a secretarial job in Long Island. But whenever her girl-chasing boss left the office, she aggressively pursued her real goal, hunting for singing jobs in Manhattan. She also decided to drop one syllable from her name.
She didn't want to hurt her dad too much, so she went from Zimmerman to Merman. And as she explained it to her dad, if you put Zimmerman up in lights, people walking underneath would just die of, the heat stroke.
How much do I love you? I'll tell you no lie. How deep...
Ethel soon found work at the hot Manhattan speakeasy Little Russia, singing tunes till 3 in the morning before staggering at dawn to her day job. But her schedule paid off the night her personality and lung power bowled over a top talent agent named Lou Irwin. He made 20-year-old Ethel his newest client and sent the now ex-secretary on a series of hit singing engagements across New York.
How far would I travel to be?
One night, her talent caught the ear of Vinton Friedley, producer of one of 1930's most anticipated musicals, George and Ira Gershwin's Girl Crazy. To Ethel's delight, Friedley instructed her to appear at the elegant penthouse of George Gershwin himself for an audition.
She went up, kind of full of trepidation, maybe the only time she ever felt any trepidation in her life. Gershwin was very nice to her, and he handed her I Got Rhythm, and she sang it. And he was so impressed, and he said, well, Miss Merman, if there's anything about this song that you'd like me to change, I'll be happy to do it. And she said, no, it's perfect. Got the job.
On October 14th, 1930, Girl Crazy premiered on Broadway. Ginger Rogers was the show's beautiful star, but the night belonged to Ethel Merman, whose knockout voice and presence transformed her from being an unknown into an overnight sensation.
I got rhythm, I got music, I got mine and that's for anything more. I got daisies in green pastures, I got mine and that's for anything more. Old man trouble, I don't mind him, you won't find him round my door. I got starlight, I got sweet dreams, I got mine and that's for anything more, that's for anything more.
Theatergoers were stunned by the power and the clarity of Merman's voice. At intermission, the excited Gershwin embraced Ethel and told her never to take a singing lesson. The next day, 22-year-old Ethel was amazed to find herself heralded in the press as the toast of Broadway. One critic raved, she can hold a note longer than the Chase Manhattan Bank. Offers poured in from nightclubs and even the New York office of Paramount Pictures, which showcased her in a series of one-reelers.
Listen, senorita, I've got great news for you.
Oh, wait a minute, Kramer. I ain't no senorita, and I can take any news standing. Spill it.
Yeah? We're sailing for Frisco tonight.
Okay, boys, I guess the party's on me. Listen, I always find the sun around, and here's the reason why. My troubles have flown, my thoughts are my own. I'm never alone with a sigh. So, be like me and not to fall in love. Give yourself with feeling. It's fun to have the feeling reeling round. Be like me and look for happiness. Cultivate and grow it. I'm telling you, I know it can be found.
The lusty singer also reveled in the company of some of Manhattan's wealthiest bachelors who were enchanted by her earthy, unpretentious attitude.
They had a lot of money, so they could, show her a life that she was really unaccustomed to, but which she aspired to. She could be very kind of coy, kind of little girl, especially when she was flirting with men. She brought that out a lot.
Ethel loved men. She really loved them. As a matter of fact, she used to refer to a part of the male anatomy as a man's most desirable part, and she meant it.
After Girl Crazy, Ethel won raves and 2 more Broadway hits, George White's Scandals and Take a Chance. And by 1933, another dream seemed close to coming true when 25-year-old Ethel was summoned to Hollywood. The project was the Paramount movie musical We're Not Dressing, starring Bing Crosby. Ethel excitedly headed west, but her stay was a disappointing failure. Her looks were considered not beautiful enough for the movies, and Ethel's performing style was deemed too exaggerated. As a result, her minor role shrank more when her only solo number was cut.
She filled the screen too much. She was too big for it. I think the camera wants to be able to come in, and it could not come into her. It always had to be backing off.
Fortunately, her frustration with the movies would be lessened thanks to songwriter Cole Porter, who was about to give Ethel one of her most celebrated roles on Broadway. You're watching Ethel Merman. The 1934 Broadway smash Anything Goes marked the first teaming of 26-year-old Ethel Merman and one of America's most sophisticated songwriters, Cole Porter. The Yale-educated millionaire composer and the earthy girl from Queens had little in common on the surface, but from the day they met, Porter adored the singer he dubbed the Divine Ethel.
I think he loved Ethel because you could understand every word she said. A lyric writer's delight.
Merman's rafter-shaking vocals and sass sealed her reputation as the queen of musical comedy. And Ethel was overjoyed when Paramount Pictures hired her to reprise the role on screen.
In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking. Now, heaven knows, anything goes.
Once again, she was joined by Paramount's top star, Bing Crosby.
You're the top.
You're just saying that.
You're the Swanee River. You're the top. You're a V8 sliver. You're the buds that grow when the winter snow drifts on. You're the walls of China. You're Carolina. You're Santa Claus.
Make more.
You're a knight in the streets of Cairo. You're a flight in an auto gyro. I'm the lazy hound that hangs around the shop. But a baby on the bottom, you're the top.
But to Ethel's irritation, the story was reworked to play up Crosby, and her starring stage role was whittled down to a supporting sidekick part. Disappointed, she returned to her true home, Broadway. In Cole Porter's Red Hot and Blue, she showed sharp comic timing alongside Jimmy Durante and Bob Hope.
2 things made Merman unique. One was the voice, the instrument, and the other was her humor. When you get a great singer, somebody who can just knock your brains out, it's very rare that they're also funny.
Jerry.
In 1937, a new door opened for 29-year-old Ethel.
Hit it, babe.
Ah!
What a pair of pipes.
A contract offer from 20th Century Fox, which he hoped might launch her at last in the movies. She was cast in one of Fox's biggest films of 1938, Alexander's Ragtime Band, starring Tyrone Power and Alice Faye. The music was by Irving Berlin, and his score gave Ethel her best moments on movie screens to date.
Without my walking stick, I'd go insane. Can't look my best, I'd feel undressed without my cane. The thing that makes me click on Lover's Lane would go for naught if I were caught without my cane. If I were caught without my walking stick, I would go insane. Can't go to town without my walking stick because it may rain and I can't be outdoors when it pours without my cane. If I ever...
But again, Ethel was mostly relegated to the sidelines as her character lost Tyrone Power to the more photogenic Alice Faye.
Jerry. Let's get married.
Have you got a fever? You sound delirious.
No, I mean, now, tonight.
Oh, no, thanks. You really don't want to marry me. You're just trying to avoid the bachelor tax.
This world of ours is ever changing.
Believe it or not, this song was cut, leaving Ethel to quip, "It's cold and lonely" on the cutting room floor.
With every change, I'm right on the beat. Won't let the grass grow under my feet. I'm marching along with time. I'll be marching from time to time, for I'm not gonna let the parade go by. You know that I'm marching on, and so do I. Marching. Oh, one day I changed my horse for a motor, and now of course I will be changing my car for a plane to fly. 'Cause time marches on, and so do I. Oh, but I'll be right with them.
After 2 more minor roles at Fox, Ethel quickly headed back to Broadway, where her hunger for stardom was fed with a Cole Porter smash. The bawdy musical Du Barry Was a Lady, co-starring Bert Lahr. Porter and Merman followed it with another hit, 1940's Panama Hattie. But for the first time, Ethel's personal life was headed toward disaster. She had fallen deeply in love with Sherman Billingsley, the married owner of New York's Stork Club. She was convinced that Billingsley would divorce and marry her. But when the millionaire's wife became pregnant, a stunned Ethel ended the relationship.
Ethel once told me that she was not happy when she was in love. She didn't like to be in love because she was always afraid she was going to get hurt.
Devastated over her breakup with Billingsley, Ethel rebounded with her first impulsive trip to the altar. The star had known Hollywood agent Bill Smith for only a few weeks when they married hastily in November of 1940, between the matinee and evening performances of Panama Hattie.
There were those urges to be the good wife and be taken care of. So she was looking for a man that she could marry and have a family, be the good wife, and maybe also have a career.
But within hours of the ceremony, Ethel realized her marriage to a near stranger was a foolish mistake. 2 months later, the pair agreed to an amicable divorce. But Ethel soon plunged into another, more intense relationship, this time with newspaper manager Robert Levitt, a protege of William Randolph Hearst. The handsome, gruff Levitt hated musicals, but he was fascinated by the colorful Ethel, who found herself passionately in love. In the fall of 1941, the singer took her second walk down the aisle. But this time, the bride was pregnant. And in July of 1942, the newlywed gave birth to a baby girl, whom she named Ethel Jr.
She was thrilled to be a mom. It was the culmination of something that she had wanted for a long time.
But although she claimed she'd take a year off from Broadway, Ethel grew impatient with life at home. She returned to the stage for Cole Porter's World War II-themed hit, Something for the Boys.
Boy, look at those drumsticks.
How'd you like a kick in the teeth with one of those drumsticks?
And I'll bet she can do it.
How do you like that? And this is the womanhood I'm fighting to protect.
And this is the womanhood I'm fighting to protect.
After 13 years of success, Ethel now had as much power as any actress on Broadway. And the tough, self-protective star was not afraid to use it. On Something for the Boys, she had cast member Paula Lawrence fired for allegedly upstaging her. But though Merman fought to protect her turf, she also befriended young talent, like her understudy Betty Garrett.
I'll tell you, she'd spit in your eye if she didn't like you, but I think she liked me. She got sick once, and I was notified at 5 o'clock in the afternoon that I was going on. She would call me in the intermission and say, "How you doing, kid?" And I said, "Oh, Ethel, I'm nervous." And she said, "Listen, if they could do it better than you, they'd be on stage and you'd be in the audience."
Ethel didn't have a nerve in her body when she stepped in front of an audience. The nerves were manifested differently. everything had to be perfect. If she wasn't feeling things were going to go well, she could be hell on wheels. And that's, I think, where her nerves came out.
In 1945, Ethel followed something for the boys with a more personal production, a son named Robert, after his father. But even as Ethel recovered in the hospital, she was being pitched another starring role on Broadway, a musical based on the life of Western sharpshooter Annie Oakley. Annie Get Your Gun boasted stellar talent, from its producers Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein to its composer Irving Berlin. Included in the score was a tune that Berlin almost dropped, one that became Ethel's signature song.
There's no business like show business, like no business I know. Everything about it.
To me, that show was as close to being perfect as any show could possibly be. I'll never forget the outrageous take she did when she sees Frank Butler, when she goes. And I thought nobody in the world could get away with that except Ethel. She was fantastic in that show.
Annie Get Your Gun became the greatest triumph of Merman's career so far. It ran over 1,100 performances, 3 years. But away from the stage, the Queen of Broadway was increasingly miserable over another disintegrating marriage. Her work hours and her fame frustrated Robert Levitt, who began to drink. Their home became a battlefield. And in 1951, their rocky 10-year marriage ended in divorce.
The greatest disappointment of Ethel's life, I think, was the fact that she had lost Bob Levitt. She regretted it as long as she lived.
But if the new decade of the 1950s found Merman's second marriage in ruins, it would also give Ethel a long-sought-after triumph, success as a Hollywood star. Ethel Merman followed the phenomenon of Annie Get Your Gun with another Irving Berlin stage hit. Call Me Madam was loosely based on the life of Pearl Mesta, the gregarious U.S. ambassador to Luxembourg. But its driving force was Ethel Merman, the hostess with the mostess, who made critics cheer, playing a blunt ambassador who finds romance in Europe. 20th Century Fox bought the movie rights, and for the first time, an ecstatic Ethel recreated one of her stage performances faithfully on film, opposite George Sanders and Donald O'Connor.
Ken, what's happened to you?
I hear singing, and there's no one there. I smell blossoms, and the trees are bare. Anyway, get down to the part. She comes in. You don't need analyzing, and the ear went. It was like a snare drum.
You don't need analyzing. It is not so surprising that you feel very strange but nice.
And she was right there. Well, it was beautiful, but you couldn't hear it for 4 or 5 days.
Put your head on my shoulder. You need someone who's older. A rub down with a velvet glove. There is nothing you can take to relieve that pleasant ache. You're not sick, you're just in love. You don't need analyzing. It is not so surprising that you feel very strange but nice. Your heart goes in a patter. I know just what's the matter, because I've been there once or twice. Put your head on my shoulder. You need someone who's older. A rub down with a velvet glove. There is nothing you can take to relieve that pleasant ache. You're not sick, you're just in love.
To Ethel's delight, Call Me Madam was a hit. At last, she had headlined in a Hollywood success. And at its premiere, the star celebrated with a new man in her life, Robert Six, the wealthy president of Continental Airlines. Again, the singer was swept off her feet by a tall millionaire. And in 1953, Ethel became Mrs. Robert Six. She soon announced that she was through with Broadway and moved with her children, 11-year-old Ethel and 8-year-old Bob, to Six's palatial home near Denver, Colorado. But for the lifelong New Yorker, it would not be an easy transition.
She convinced herself that she could be the docile, wife of the 50s. And then the real personality would come out. And I think that was a real struggle for her because those two things at that time really couldn't be reconciled.
Ethel may have sworn off Broadway, but she was eager to build on the movie success of Call Me Madam. Fox prepared a follow-up, once again featuring songs by Irving Berlin. The result was the big-budget extravaganza, There's No Business Like Show Business.
There's no peaceful like show, peaceful they smile when they are low.
Ethel portrayed an overbearing but loving stage mom, whose family was played by Donald O'Connor, Dan Daly, and Mitzi Gaynor.
Bob, big man now coming home like...
You're drowning me.
Don't put any ideas in my head.
Yeah, but
Down, boy, down.
When I was going to do There's No Business Like Show Business, she walked into the room, the one and only Miss Ethel Merman, and she proceeded to tell me the dirtiest story I have ever heard in my life. I cannot, of course, this is a family show, I cannot, and I can't even use any gestures, but I fell on the floor and we became best friends.
Anything you can do, we can do better.
We can do anything better than you.
Hey!
One day, the phone rang and the voice said, Methala, do you want to have dinner with the Windsors tonight? So that night we had dinner with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Everybody's dancing, and the Duke and Duchess are just sitting there, and Ethel's about to get up and dance with somebody, and she said, Hey, Duke, get off your ass and dance with your wife. And he did.
Pablo, Chico, Miguelito.
Ethel's most notorious co-star in the film was Fox's #1 bombshell, Marilyn Monroe. The sex goddess played Merman's foe on screen and proved a real-life source of constant irritation.
Oh, this kid and I have just got to wind up the best of chums.
With Marilyn, she had this phobia. I told everybody about it, that she was afraid to get in front of the camera. She was scared to death.
If we were doing a scene together, she would make Ethel wait, and you don't make Miss Merman wait. Walter, Walter, where's the blonde? And then Marilyn would come in all kind of dewy and kind of starry-eyed, and oh, I'm so sorry that I just was a little confused about where to go and what to do. And Ethel looks at me like, what is this kind of routine?
Mom, I think you owe Vicki an apology. What?
This isn't my idea, Mrs. Donahue.
No, it isn't. It's mine. I think it's high time you two got things straightened out.
Oh, so that's the plot. Apparently my daughter, you are my daughter, aren't you, Mrs. Gibbs?
I think so.
Apparently my daughter has the idea that you and I ought to be friends. Do you mind if I ask her what she thinks we have in common?
The film allowed Ethel to sing a stellar array of Irving Berlin songs, but to her disappointment, it opened to mixed reviews and failed to ignite Ethel's struggling film career. By the late 1950s, Ethel was frustrated with her husband's frequent work trips, which raised suspicion in her jealous mind. She also grew regretful about her divorce from Robert Levitt. So it came as a shocking blow in 1958 when Levitt, the father of her 2 children, committed suicide with an overdose of pills.
His death really affected her deeply. She went through a period of intense regret about the fact that they were not able to make the marriage work.
But for Ethel, Robert Levitt's act of self-destruction was only the first in a series of spiraling tragedies to come.
For the Web's Best Bios, logo.
In 1958, Ethel Merman returned to Broadway with a role that would be her most personally rewarding. Gypsy was based on the life of stripper Gypsy Rose Lee, but the show's focus was Lee's Mama Rose, the ultimate controlling stage mother. During the show's intense rehearsal, Ethel was exhilarated by the challenge of the most complex acting part she'd ever tackled.
I had a dream.
a dream about you, baby. It's gonna come true, baby. They think that we're through, but...
Merman, as the mother in Gypsy, changed the face of musicals in that she was an anti-hero. And we saw, warts and all, this driven, sick woman. And it was fantastic.
Life's a life. You got nothing to hit above the height. You'll be swell. You'll be great. I can tell. Just you wait. That lucky star I talk about is you. Honey, everything's coming up. Roses for me and for you.
When Gypsy opened on May 21st, 1959, it was recognized as Merman's greatest triumph. Ethel loved the show, and she developed a girlish crush on her co-star, Jack Klugman, who had been warned to avoid the legendary headliner.
He said, "I'll be careful. Boy, that barracuda, she'll eat you alive." We've been rehearsing about 2 weeks. She looked at me and she said, "You're a moody son of a bitch." And I said, "What?" She said, "Well, you don't say hello unless I say hello. You come in there, you're so aloof." I said, "Well, you're the star." She said, "Have I been a star with you?" I said, "No." She said, "Then cut it out." And we just made the contact, and from then on, we had a platonic love affair that lasted until the day that she died.
When Warner Brothers planned to film Gypsy, Ethel dreamed of preserving her favorite role on screen. But despite promises from the director that she would get the part, the studio bypassed Merman for the more bankable Rosalind Russell. Ethel was heartbroken.
She was destroyed by that. She wanted to preserve this. This was going to be her legacy, and she knew it.
A more painful betrayal also agonized the actress. Her worst suspicions about Robert Six were confirmed when she discovered her husband was having an affair. In 1960, the embittered star divorced for the third time. She also despaired over her strained relationship with Ethel Jr., the daughter Merman called Little Bit.
Life was very difficult for my mom, growing up, being the daughter of Ethel Merman. I think she really hated having her mother's name. It kind of made it difficult for her to feel that she had an identity of her own. She was not a very strong person.
Ethel's daughter once said to me, "Mom scares me sometimes." And I could understand that. I could see it.
In 1960, Ethel was furious to learn her daughter had suddenly married. But her attitude softened 5 months later when Ethel Jr. gave birth to a daughter, Barbara, casting Merman in the new role of a doting grandmother.
There's all this dough, 350 G's.
In 1963, Ethel returned to Hollywood for her first film in a decade. Director Stanley Kramer's comedy, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, in which she played a mother-in-law from hell.
Nobody's going to get me up in the air.
Days after the hit film opened, 55-year-old Ethel was introduced at a party to another actor, Oscar winner Ernest Borgnine. Ethel had grown insecure about her attractiveness to men and was thrilled when Borgnine initiated a whirlwind courtship.
When Ethel met Ernest Borgnine, she was madly in love. He swept her off her feet. And he was very, very, very good to her then. They were terrific together for 5 minutes, and then they got married.
On June 27th, 1964, Ethel Merman and Ernest Borgnine wed and joyously embarked on a honeymoon trip to the Orient. But exactly 1 day later, Merman phoned her agent. And amid a torrent of obscenities, she shouted to him that the marriage was over.
Whatever really happened, she never wanted to discuss. She said it came down to dollars and cents or reality or whatever, but none of us will ever really know.
I said, "Tell me why you married Mr. Borgnine." She said, "Because he asked me."
She never really trusted anyone enough to have a relationship after that. There were many times when she felt quite alone in the world after that.
Again, the star escaped into work with a major New York revival of Annie Get Your Gun. Some joke that with a 58-year-old star, the show should be called Granny Get Your Gun. But Merman won rave reviews. Among her co-stars and fans was a rising talent named Jerry Orbach.
She had a great time. Ethel was kind of a lusty lady. She was always looking for action, and if she had a couple of drinks, you know, especially on the road, she'd give somebody the ray, you know, and then it was, uh-oh, she's after him tonight.
Despite changing times and a new generation of female singing stars, Ethel had tenaciously kept her place in the spotlight for 4 decades. But the late 1960s would be a painful time for Merman. Rock was the music of the day, and the staunchly Republican star hated the new frankness found in movies and theater.
She knew her way around a 4-letter word. But Ethel Merman was a very religious woman. Her favorite songs were Christmas carols and hymns, and especially the Lord's Prayer.
But Ethel's faith could not mend the growing rift between her and her emotionally troubled daughter. In 1967, Ethel Jr. divorced her husband, sharing custody of their 2 children. Merman tried to reach out to the frail 25-year-old, but their meetings ended in excruciating fights.
She wanted so much the best for them, and she did the best she could. And she suffered so much because she didn't know what else to do.
On August 23, 1967, Ethel Merman received the call dreaded by every parent. Ethel Jr. had been found dead after taking a fatal combination of alcohol and prescription pills.
It was devastating to Grandma. Mom had just started to seem in a space where she was recovering, and all of a sudden, boom, she was gone.
She said to us, she said, how could a little bit do that to me? That's a funny thing to say, isn't it? She took it very, very hard.
For the first time, Ethel seemed inconsolable. A decade that began with the triumph of Gypsy was ending for her in agonizing loneliness. To survive the greatest tragedy of her life, the star would turn to the only place she never felt abandoned, the Broadway stage. In 1970, Ethel Merman made her final return to Broadway. Years earlier, the star had turned down Hello, Dolly, citing exhaustion. But as the show neared the end of its run, Ethel agreed to step into the role, winning critics' cheers. But away from the stage, her triumph was shadowed by the failing health of her beloved parents, the only people who had stood by her entire life. When her mother slipped into a coma in 1973, a distraught Ethel spent every day at her side, finding some measure of peace by helping at the hospital.
She thought, well, I could be doing something useful, so she volunteered her services in the gift shop. She said once that a lady stopped her in the elevator and said, did anyone ever tell you you look like Ethel Merman? She said, I'll bet Ethel Merman wishes she looked like you. So Ethel loved that.
After the death of her mother in 1974 and the loss of her father 3 years later, the lonely Ethel plunged into work. She launched a new career, singing with symphony orchestras nationwide. But one of her most touching appearances in the 1970s was one she had not planned.
Ethel Merman, First Lady of Musical Comedy, this is your life.
Oh, I first started to sing, I think, when I was about 5 years of age. My father always played the piano, and when I was a little girl, I used to stand next to the piano and sing. He used to play for me.
Your dad always believed you had a great singing voice.
Oh, he always believed I had a loud voice. Yeah.
They said, here are your grandchildren. And we came out, and she burst into tears. I think she kind of regarded us as the last part of her family that she was really connected to.
From stenographer to Broadway's brightest musical comedy star and leading member of American show business nobility, this is your life.
Oh, thank you so much.
In 1978, Ethel published a lively autobiography. It was mostly candid, but its most talked about chapter, titled My Marriage to Ernest Borgnine, was one blank page. And although her much publicized disco album flopped in 1979, Ethel was amazed when a movie cameo, which took barely an hour to film, introduced her to a whole new generation of fans.
What's his problem?
It's Lieutenant Hurwitz. Severe shell shock. Thinks he's Ethel Merman.
You'll be swell. You'll be great. Gonna have the whole world on a plate. Starting here, starting now. Honey, everything's coming up right.
War is hell.
On May 10th, 1982, Ethel was thrilled to make a triumphant solo appearance at Carnegie Hall. And months later, the 75-year-old star looked forward to singing on the Academy Awards. On April 7th, 1983, Ethel packed her bags and was moments away from leaving her New York apartment when she suddenly collapsed. The star had suffered a massive stroke. She was rushed into surgery, where doctors diagnosed a brain tumor. In an instant, she had lost the ability to walk or speak. In her final unhappy months of illness, Ethel allowed few friends to see her, but she was lovingly looked after by her son Robert and her close friend Tony Quantrill.
When she got ill, we had a little needlepoint pillow made that said, "She's me pal." The first song that she had ever sung as a little girl, and she really couldn't speak at this point. And we went to the hospital, and Ethel looked at the pillow and she started to cry. And she put the pillow up to her cheek, and she sang the whole song perfectly. That was probably the last performance Ethel Merman ever gave.
On February 15th, 1984, Broadway's mightiest voice was silenced forever. Ethel Merman was 76. In a poignant gesture of respect, the Great White Way dimmed its lights. To honor the star, Cole Porter and Irving Berlin had hailed the American musical's greatest performer. In the years since her passing, her legend has only grown. Dramatic actress, singer extraordinaire, camp icon, lioness of Broadway.
She was like a New Yorker's dream of what a woman should be like. She was brassy, she was proud, she had a wonderful, wonderful sense of humor. She was a survivor.
When she was trusting, she was like a little girl. But when she was tough, she was as old as Methuselah and as strong. So there were many colors to her.
After Ethel died, Alex Cohen, the great producer, was interviewed on television. He told the interviewer, "You can be replaced, and I can be replaced, but Ethel Merman can never be replaced."
Let's go on with the
Ethel Merman can't be replaced or forgotten. Earlier this year, her name